In lesson 7.2, we're going to start with the preparation of trays. So as you know, as we looked at in the diagram and as we've talked about already, we are growing microgreens in trays of soil. You can use other things instead of a tray, but for the sake of just looking at the process, we'll just call whatever production unit you're using a tray. So this is where things start, and because your microgreens are going to spend their whole life in this tray of soil, it's important that we do a good job in preparation to make sure it's an optimum environment, especially when you're using a shallow tray, which means small inconsistencies can actually have a big impact on your final production. So here's some things to consider when prepping trays, and for this section there's a video or two to follow that you can look over as well. So here we're going to focus on principles. So one is make sure you have lots of space. We took a look at the production space when we looked at infrastructure, and for prepping trays, I find the more space the better. And this was one of my favorite tray prep areas in the past because there was just so much open space. It just makes it easier to lay out all the trays at once, not be doing a lot of in-between steps, like constantly pulling trays off of a stack. You want to get as much out as you can and get lots of soil on it. So that leads us to principle number 2, where you actually want to use an excessive amount of soil on top of the trays. So this last picture here, actually, I've got some soil sort of dumped in the trays, but this is not the way to fill trays. The way I would do it is I actually dump lots and lots of soil on top of the trays. So you can see here there's way more soil than I could possibly need for that tray, but it actually makes it much more effective to get the soil into the corners and the edges. So you're never just trying to fill a tray evenly to the top. What you want to do is overfill the tray and then remove the excess to smooth it out. So that's going to be a really important approach, which actually makes things quite a bit quicker as well. It's really important that your soil is moist but not wet. If you're using a peat or a coir-based soil, you're going to find if it's dry, not only is it really hard to form and work with, but it'll easily float up and get in your eyes and actually can hurt quite a bit. So the moisture in the soil is going to be really important for keeping it contained and also for packing it into the trays really, really well. That's really, really crucial because without the moisture, you're not actually getting enough soil into the trays. When we think about how moist it should be, think about a very, very well wrung out sponge. You want to feel the moisture in there, but if you were to squeeze that soil, there's no way water should be coming out. That's going to be way too much. So when you're preparing the soil in the trays, it's really important that you press it into the trays really, really well, and especially around the edges and corners. In outdoor production, we often talk about the principle of trying to avoid the compaction of soil. And so this might seem a little counterintuitive, but with the right amount of water and the makeup of soil mainly being a peat or coir and perlite or vermiculite, you can't really compact that type of soil unless you have way too much water in there. So press it into the trays really, really well, because that's going to make sure you've got a really, really good, dense layer of soil in there for really, really good rooting capacity. And it's the soil that's going to hold the water that you need to feed your plants. This may seem a little trivial and obsessive compulsive, but it's actually quite important that your soil is almost perfectly level when it's finished. So you're going to start with that excess of soil on the tray, but when you brush it off, you want to make sure you've got a very even amount of soil. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So if you've got a dip in the soil, that means there's going to be a little less capacity of the soil in that place to hold water because there's a little bit less soil there to actually hold the water. And if you think about your rooting space, when you've only got 1 1/4 inch deep tray and you've got like maybe a 1/4 inch dip, that's 20% of the soil that's gone in terms of rooting depth that you've lost. So a little bit of a dip actually makes a very big difference. And when you're working with a round seed like pea, they often kind of fall into that dip and make even distribution very difficult. In the same regard, having bumps in the trays where there's a little bit of a mound, that might seem good for extra rooting space and extra space to hold water, but it actually makes the seeds kind of roll off if they're round, and it also makes stacking the trays much more difficult. when we're stacking the trays, which we're going to look at in the next, in a few sections, we really want there to be good contact with the seeds on the soil surface and the tray that is going to be stacked above it. And if you have bumps or dips, that's going to be very, very difficult. So these are some general principles. The filling the tray part is easy. These principles are making sure you do a really good job of that. So a couple of other things to consider. If you remember when we talked about soil previously, I talked about it's really important to prepare more than just the trays you need for your upcoming sowing, but for 2 to 3 sowings. And I find this just makes the whole production system and logistics much, much easier. And in doing that, you want to make sure you've got a place where you can stack and store the trays that's rodent proof and with very easy access. We probably looked at this image before, but we just have a little shed where we can stack a lot of trays and basically produce as much as makes sense, or as much as our tray capacity will allow us to do. Another thing is, so when carrying trays, we always carry them by the long edges. If you start carrying by the short edges, it actually causes them to bend a little bit, and this makes them a lot more likely to break. And so just carrying them a specific way can actually extend their life significantly. We have gone through phases where we've actually doubled up the tray, so we have 2 trays all the time, which makes them a lot stronger. The challenge there was some of our crops, like wheatgrass, we were selling by the tray. And so the trays were going out and not coming back, and it just we end up losing trays a lot. And it means you're buying significantly more trays. And if you remember, we talked about how many trays you need to buy. So ideally, try to buy better quality trays instead of doubling them up like that. And in this process, one person can do this job, but what we've really found is working in groups of 2 or more makes it A, much more tolerable, but B, when you're working with your team, it often gives you a good sort of planning time. So this is sort of when we might review, some of our crops for the week, talk about deliveries and customers, and then, just talk about our personal lives as well. There's a lot of tasks within a production system that could potentially be quite isolating. So we designed into the system quite intentionally the processes to involve 2 or more people. And in some cases, there's only 1 person for whatever reason. In some cases, there's 3 or 4 people. So just keep that in mind as something that's beyond just the preparation of trays and the production process, but the work environment and different aspects of the social component of work that you're building into the system. So now that we've prepped our trays and they're ready to go, we can start looking at the next part of the process, which is rinsing, soaking, and sanitizing the seed to get them ready for sowing.